What's up guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm going to be answering your questions all about the song creation process, and also about musical instruments.
How do you get your inspiration for all your music?
This definitely varies from person to person, but for me personally, it's sounds. And let me explain what I mean by that, because it actually encompasses a couple of different things. First, when I'm in Logic or one of my portable synthesizers, I'll often just flip through presets and kind of noodle around on the keyboard or pads until I come up with something that kind of fits. Because when I hear a new sound that maybe I haven't heard before, my particular tastes in music will immediately suggest to me some kind of melody or some kind of chord progression or some kind of pattern to play using that preset. The whole thing is very gut-based. It's very instinctual. And I'll just kind of keep flipping through stuff and noodling around until I find something that I like, something that I go, oh, this is actually something I could develop into a full song. And the great thing about this technique is that this should work not just for me, but for you guys, because if you and I hear the exact same sound, we'll very likely come up with something completely different based on our mood at the time and based off our tastes in music. And of course, sometimes I will have to go through a lot of stuff before I find something I like, and sometimes I'll change out the sound after I come up with a melody I like. This is mostly just a way of generating inspiration. So that's one way I get ideas from sounds. The other is simply the fact that I listen to a ton of music. Thanks to my Spotify subscription, I go through music at a pretty insane rate. And this means that I'm constantly hearing new sounds and new ideas that I can pull little bits and pieces from. This is everything from big stuff like genres and overall vibes to little production techniques that I hear that catch my ear and go, hey, I could do that in a future song. And often I'll go on what at this point I like to call a genre binge, where I'll be listening to pretty much nothing but one style of music for 2 to 3 weeks. And all that usually culminates in me making a song in that style. A good example of this is my Fox Stevenson remix. Leading up to that, I had been listening to a ton of melodic dubstep, and so when that remix competition came along, there was a vocal here, it was at a dubstep tempo, and it was perfect for me to jump in and make a melodic dubstep track. And because I had a vocal to work with, and because I had been listening to this style non-stop, it kind of permeated my brain, so I was able to make the majority of that song in a one-day marathon production session. And that's definitely not the only time this has happened. It's a pretty regular occurrence, and that's why I set this channel up very intentionally from the beginning to allow me to explore whatever sounds and styles that I feel like at any given time. And as I mentioned before, there are a lot of little smaller things that I'll often pick out from songs that I'll end up incorporating into my own music. So maybe it's a specific snare tone, or a technique used in a bass growl, or a fill, or something like that that'll catch my ear, and then I'll remember that, and so when I actually sit down to work on music, I just have a bunch of these little ideas floating around in my head for how to make a song more interesting, more engaging for the listener. Beyond the sounds, I will just occasionally come up with a melody or chord progression more out of a vacuum, but that doesn't happen very often, so that's why I have all these other things in place to make sure that I'm coming up with new ideas regularly.
How long does it normally take to turn an idea into a full song?
That varies pretty wildly depending on the idea and when I came up with it. For remixes and covers, I can typically crank out the bulk of a track in a single day because the song structure is already laid out for me. And usually I have a pretty clear idea of the style I'm going for before I even start. Then from there, I'll usually spend a day or two just on and off refining the track, making it more interesting, and tweaking the mixing and mastering to make it sound as polished as it possibly can. For an original song, usually it takes about 1 to 2 weeks of on and off work. And this is because everything is from me. It's all original stuff, and so everything has to be very intentionally built up to catch your ear and to keep you engaged throughout the song. So I make sure to spend more time on that, and also there's some time spent procrastinating on maybe starting a new section. I typically like to have my second drop be different from the first drop, for instance. And sometimes I can get a little stuck there, and that's something that takes extra time. Adding other sections, like intros and builds, is a little easier because that tends to be a little more formulaic, but even then, sometimes it's still hard to kind of force yourself to do that once you've been stuck in an 8-bar loop for so long. Doing original songs on the Novation circuit or OP1 tends to be a bit quicker because they're a bit more limited in their track count and whatnot, so it often forces me to come up with stuff that's as full as it can be with as few elements as possible, and it also forces me to come up with new song sections much more quickly. So to sum up that long and somewhat meandering answer, it typically depends on how many additional ideas I need to come up with to make it a full song, and can take anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. Song process? My process usually goes something like this: idea generation, developing those ideas into an 8-bar loop or two, then selecting, designing, and mixing sounds kinda all at once. arranging the song, then doing a final mix and master. I've already talked about coming up with and developing ideas, and I'll be talking about my mastering process in a future Q&A video. If you want to know more about my layering and sound design and mixing processes, check out my drop in 10 minutes videos. I'll link those in the description.
Do you have any tips for working through trouble areas and actually finishing songs? I have too many that are like 80% done.
Study other music. Take a song that does what you're trying to do really well, and then completely break it down and understand exactly how it does what you're trying to do. And don't just passively listen to it. Actually physically write down exactly what you're hearing, and then use that as kind of a roadmap for your own song. For instance, I used to have a lot of trouble making my build-ups and transitions flow smoothly, so I went and found a bunch of songs that had really nice, smooth build-ups and transitions, and sat down with a pen and paper and actually wrote down exactly what I heard them doing. So they slowly filtered this thing in here over this amount of time, or they brought this element in here, or hey, look, there's that element in the background, or this element drops out here. All these kind of things that then I can use as a template for what I'm trying to do. Another good example of this is song structure. A good way to get out of the 8-bar loop rut that a lot of us tend to get stuck in is to find a song that has a similar vibe or similar style to the one that you're making, and then break down exactly what they do over time. Break down the arrangement, break down the structure, and then copy that. Copy paste everything out, and then add and remove elements as necessary, add build-ups and drops where they do, and then tweak your arrangement as needed to fit your song better. I've done this a ton, and in electronic music, there are really only like 3 main structures of songs anyway, so you're not ripping anyone off. So, next time you are stuck on a song, study other music, and then use the techniques that they used to get yourself unstuck. And 9 times out of 10, not only will it get you unstuck on that song, but it'll also get you unstuck on future songs.
How many instruments do you know how to play, and what are they?
3. I'm really good at one and passably mediocre at the other 2. The one I'm actually good at is drums. I've been playing it for years, and for most of the time I've been playing it, I've taken it really seriously. I had lessons, I practiced a ton, and spent a bunch of time refining my timing and fills and all that kind of fun stuff. And the fact that drums were my first instrument and continue to be the one I'm best at probably shows up a lot in the music that I make. It sounds like it was made by a drummer, because it was. And this manifests itself in a lot of different ways, everything from the way I write rhythm parts and the way I write stuff rhythmically, to the fact that I typically mix my snare drum way too loud, just because I like a really loud, punchy snare drum. The other 2 instruments I play are guitar and piano, and that's really nothing spectacular, just enough to kind of play some chords to pop songs to be able to accompany a vocalist. And I usually write my melodies on a MIDI keyboard, so I do know my way around a piano well enough to be able to do that.
You can only play one acoustic instrument for the rest of your life. What would you choose?
This is tough because my real instrument goals and my electronic music production goals are usually pretty divergent from each other. My real instrument playing has always been kind of in the world of rock and a little bit of metal, whereas my electronic music stuff is kind of all over the map. But if I wanted something that kind of encompassed all of this, I would probably have to say drums and other forms of percussion, because on stuff like the Novation circuit, it's all very percussive with the pads, and I could probably end up figuring out a lot of interesting and kind of unique stuff if I only had percussion instruments to work with. So yeah, drums. Alright, that is it for today. If you have a question you would like me to answer in a future Q&A, be sure to leave it in the comments down below, and I will try to answer it in a future video. I'm putting out 2 videos per week this summer, so if you have not already, I would love to have you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys on Monday.